Director, Deans, new professors, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here today. This is a great honor that has been conferred upon me. I'm going to talk to you today about a rather serious subject and something that has concerned me for some time. About 18 months ago, I was asked to speak in front of the European Commission about the future of medicine. I'm not a medical doctor, but I do have some ideas about where medicine might be going. But immediately before that talk, I was at a small meeting in Ghent, hearing about what was happening with genetically modified foods. And as a result of listening to the talks and realizing what was going on, I actually changed my lecture at the last minute before I went to the European Commission. Now, I started that lecture by talking about the difference between the medical needs of the developing world and of the developed world. We have the great advantage here in Europe, in the US, in the developed world, of being able to afford a great deal of medicine. And in fact, medical costs are going up and up all the time. We're always asking for better medicines. We want the very best that is available. However, if we look at what is happening in the developing countries, they are not in a position to get the kind of medicine that we get here. What they need really are very practical solutions to their problems, and the costs have to be lower. There are many things that they need. I've just picked one or two here. Vaccines. You'll notice that in the developed world, we have vaccines against almost every major disease that we have problems with. In the developing world, where tropical diseases are a problem, in general there are no vaccines for most of these. And why? Because there has never been any profitable business in making vaccines for the developing world. Similarly, cheap drugs are absolutely essential for the developing world. They don't have the money to pay for the fancy chemotherapy that we have, for instance, in the developed world. And very often, it is antibiotics that are targeted at specific organisms, not the broad-spectrum antibiotics, which end up causing more trouble than they solve many times. And they need antivirals. There are many viral diseases that affect the developing world that are a problem. And then we mustn't forget the fact that much of the basic care that is needed in the developing world, helping ladies who are pregnant, making sure that they have a good pregnancy, that the kids are born healthy. And in particular, we need better ways of diagnosing things when they go wrong. You notice increasingly in the developed world, the cost of diagnosis goes up and up and up. MRIs, fancy x-rays, all sorts of fancy diagnostic techniques that are very expensive and are completely unavailable in the developing world unless you happen to be in that very small percentage of the people who are rich and can afford to come to Europe or the US in order to get diagnosis and treatment. But I was struck particularly by the fact that what the developing world really needs is food. You know, if you're hungry, you don't care so much about medicine. You don't care whether you've been vaccinated or not. If you're hungry, you just want a good meal. And I think this is an area where I am greatly concerned because we actually have ways of providing better food that we're not exploiting at the moment. Now, if you look at the problems that are faced by the developing world in terms of their needs for food, in Africa, in South America, in a lot of Asia, they need better crops. They need crops in which if you have just a small piece of land, you can get a better yield. Europe, on the other hand, doesn't need GMOs. You don't see very many Europeans who are thin walking around the streets. You don't see emaciated people in the US very often. We, in the developed world in general, do not need GMOs. And yet what we have seen is that in Europe in particular, there has been a big movement against GMOs and to stop producing GMOs, to regulate them. And this is because we've been told that they are dangerous. And I have to ask why. Why is it that Europe, and now some other countries too, have come to the conclusion that GMOs are dangerous? And I have a question at the bottom of this slide. Could it be politics? Could it be money? Or could it be both? And what happened, and it is unbelievably sad what has happened, is that when GMOs were first introduced into Europe, there was a widespread backlash against the multinational companies who wanted to introduce them, Monsanto in particular, because Europeans were afraid that some big multinational company was going to control their food supply. And they did this by saying, well, we're not against Monsanto, we're against GMOs. But, well, we are against Monsanto, but it's GMOs. And so they made the case, the political case, that GMOs were dangerous. And as you know, it is really an amazing fact that politicians like nothing better than to tell you that something is very dangerous, but we will protect you from this. Vote for us. And this is what happened here. The Green parties found an irresistible political argument. And it was even better because Europe didn't need GMOs. And when Monsanto first introduced them, Monsanto set it up in such a way that they made a lot of money, the farmers made some money, and the consumers got no benefit whatsoever. And this was, I think, just a menu for disaster. It was terrible. And the beauty of it was no political, no economic consequences for Europe. We don't need them, so what does it matter? What a great cause in order to gain some power. And of course, the real villain here were not GMOs per se, they were just a useful scapegoat. And one could make all sorts of arguments that they were dangerous. One was taking genes from things other than plants and putting them into plants. This must be dangerous. You know, nature doesn't do this. It must be dangerous. But in fact, the venom was really focused on the multinationals. But it was never directed at the multinationals per se. They used GMO as the scapegoat. Now, the problem with this is that while Europe doesn't need GMOs, the rest of the world does. The developing world absolutely needs GMOs. But the Green parties could not go and tell everybody else, oh, GMOs are good for you, they're a disaster for Europe. They're dangerous in Europe, but they're okay for you. Now that doesn't play terribly well. It's illogical and it's stupid. It's obviously not going to work. And what's happened is that the Green parties are now spreading this message around the world. Until recently, India had pretty much agreed they were going to ban GMOs, until Modi became the premier. And now, the first thing he did was to throw Greenpeace out of India, and now they're trying to work their way back in. He was a sensible man. Now, what I want to do is to tell you why GMOs are not dangerous, and why we should be very, very careful about the propaganda that is put out by political movements. You know, for 10,000 years, ever since agriculture was first discovered in Mesopotamia, people realized there were some interesting grains growing. But maybe they didn't stand up quite as straight as you would like them to. And so the clever people started to make hybrids between the grains that had nice big grains on them and the plants that would stand up straight that were relatives. And the plant breeders have known for years that you can take plants that are not too far apart and you can make hybrids that will have some of the characteristics of one and some of the other. Now you have to realize when you make a hybrid plant, you take hundreds of genes from one plant and and transfer them into the other. You don't know what those genes are. You don't know where they've gone. You don't know what are the consequences of this. It's like taking a car, a Rolls Royce, mixing up all the parts, throwing them into a Volkswagen and hoping that you will get something that works better than the original Volkswagen. This is what the traditional plant breeders do. And then they look at traits. So they look at many hundreds of these crosses and look for the things that grow taller, or the ones that produce a better yield, or the ones that are more nutritious for you. And if they can't get them by crossing, then they have another trick up their sleeve. They irradiate them. They take ionizing radiation and treat the plants and hope that this will activate some genes, and then they will get the plants that they want. And if that doesn't work, they'll take chemical mutagens and mutagenize them like mad so that they get lots of mutant genes into these plants. But of course, this is safe. Because we've been doing it for so long, and because this is the traditional techniques that the plant breeders have used, the Green Party will have you believe that this is inherently safe, just because we've been doing it for years. Now, modern methods of genetic modification, and what I've told you about so far is merely genetic modification, it's just a different sort. Modern methods take one gene, maybe from a plant, it may be from an animal, maybe from a bacterium, and they put it into the new plant. And they pick that gene because it is going to have a particularly desired effect. When it's transferred, they look and see where it went, they know what effect it has had on the new plant, and then you take the product and you test it. You see, is it safe to eat? Does it kill rats? Does it have any consequences that are bad? Now, in principle, traditional plant breeding, you do the same thing, but inherently traditional plant breeding is considered to be safe, and so the tests that are applied to traditional plants are not the same as those that are applied to GM plants. But what's important is not how you make the new plant. What's important is what is the product. Okay? If I take my old VW and I take my Rolls Royce and I decide I want to put a better carburetor into the VW, and I take the one from the Rolls Royce and I rig it and I put it in. This is what genetic engineering, GMOs, this is what we do. We take one good gene that we really want and put it in the new car. Maybe it could be a GPS. Maybe the VW doesn't have a GPS, and so we take a GPS from the Rolls Royce and we put it into the VW, and then we test, does it work? Well, I think we all know with these GPSs, you move them from one place to another, and they usually work. So what is important is not how you do it. It is the product. Is the product safe? Is it not? What I want to do is to give you one case study that, for reasons best known to themselves, the Green Parties have been adamantly against. And personally, I find this appalling that they would oppose what I'm about to tell you. Within the developing world, vitamin A deficiency is a huge problem. Something between 1 and 2 million people die every year because they do not get enough vitamin A usually when they were babies or when they were growing up. You need vitamin A in order to develop properly, in order not to go blind, in order to start your life in a good way. And the reason they don't have vitamin A is because most of them do not live on a diet that has enough beta-carotene. Beta-carotene and the stuff that makes carrots orange, this is the precursor of vitamin A. And it's a problem if you don't get enough. Now, two scientists, Ingo Petrakis and Peter Beyer, decided that they were going to try and do something about this using the modern GM methods. They decided that they would take the gene that encodes beta-carotene and move it into rice. Now, rice is a staple product for many, many people in the developing world. And you do not need a great deal of beta-carotene in order to overcome vitamin A deficiency. In fact, this gentleman here from the Philippines is holding as much as it would take in order to get your recommended daily allowance of vitamin A from golden rice. But golden rice has the unfortunate probability, because it's GM, it must be dangerous. We know exactly which gene was put in, and we know what happens, and we know the nutritional benefits from it. It became a reality in 1999. This was when the original transformation experiments were done that put this gene into rice. By 2002, it was ready to go for field tests. Normally, for things like this, for new products, you put them out in the field. They grow well in the lab, but do they grow okay out in the field? This is the ultimate test. And they were ready to do that. And at this point, Greenpeace mounted a massive campaign to stop them because they were genetically modified. And what has happened is that because of the effect that the breeds have had on the general population, on the politicians, on the regulators, golden rice still is not under field test. In fact, just last year, it was tried in the Philippines to grow a test field. And Greenpeace and their colleagues sent thugs out to the field to burn the crops. And this was ostensibly to save us from these very, very dangerous GMOs, without giving any thought whatsoever to whether this was going to benefit people in the developing world. Now, you ask, well, how do we know that it's safe? Well, of course, I could always scare you. I could tell you about lots of things that are dangerous. And so the GMs, the Green parties went out and told us about all sorts of things. And then professional societies cut in. And on the left-hand side of this chart, you will see a list of every major professional society in this area who have made statements. In fact, this runs on for many, many pages. This is a list of all of the scientific academies that have said this technology is safe, it's okay, we should be using it. On the right-hand side is every scientific society that has said these are dangerous. Now, Greenpeace argues they're dangerous. Every scientific society says they're safe. In fact, in the last 20 years, people have been eating GM foods made by these modern methods in the US, and so far, there is not a single incident of any problem. Not one. Absolutely nothing. You know that every so often, a scientific paper will come out, and someone will say, oh, we were feeding people these genetically modified foods, and they cause cancer in rats. And then about 6 months later, another paper will come out and say, well, we looked at these studies that were done before, and they should not have been published because they're not accurate, they were not done properly, they're wrong. Greenpeace will tell you all about this first set of studies. They will fail to mention the second set of studies. So what we're facing is a situation in which since 2002, when golden rice was ready to go to the breeders, more than 15 million children have died or suffered because of vitamin A deficiency. And my question to you is, how many kids have to die before we consider this a crime against humanity to stop them getting the very plants, the very foods that they need? And this is just one example. There are many cases where the nutritional value of food could be enhanced rather easily using GM methods. But of course, scientists are not allowed to do this. They won't do it because they can't get regulatory approval, and this is strictly because the Green parties have gone after them. And I think they have made a mistake, and it's high time that they stood up and they said, we made a mistake on this issue. We're sorry that we're leading pretty directly to a lot of death in the world, and that the developing world really doesn't matter, because it's the developed world where our constituency is, where we have political power and where we raise money. For me, this is immoral. I want to just give you one or two examples of the kind of fabrications that the Green parties have used to sway opinion in Europe and to persuade people that this is dangerous stuff and one should not meddle with it. The first is that you need massive amounts of golden rice in order to get enough vitamin A. When golden rice was first developed, that was partially true, but it was clear that by breeding you could increase the amounts. We now know you don't need very much. Then they claimed that all of these suicides in India from poor farmers were because of biotechnology and the rise in these biotech methods to make better plants. And then finally, they will have you believe that pesticide use increases for GMOs. Let me deal with the first of these, golden rice. In order to get enough cooked rice to satisfy the recommended daily allowance, the Greens were putting out this: 9 kilograms of cooked rice were necessary, 3.5 kilograms of dry rice for everybody who wanted it. What is the truth? The truth is that 50 grams, that amount that I showed you in the hand of the Filipino man, is all you need per day in order to satisfy your requirements. This is the Indian farmer suicide figures. If you look at the line at the top, you will see this is the number per year since mid-1990s. And the line at the bottom, the line that is going up, this is when engineered biotech crops were first introduced into India. Now, if this is causing more suicides, then I don't know how they interpret the statistics on this graph, because in fact, if anything, the numbers are slightly diminishing. They have nothing to do with biotechnology. And finally, the thing that I find really appalling is that in the case of Bt cotton, Bt is a pesticide that is put out by a bacteria, Bacillus thuringiensis. It has a protein it puts on the outside of its body, and you can use it, you can grow the bacteria and spray it all over your plants, and people have done this for many years. You can also isolate the Bt toxin itself and put it out as a protein, or you can take the gene for that toxin and put it into cotton, and then when the bugs come along and try to eat the cotton, it kills them. In 2001, there were 5,750 metric tons of pesticides were used in order to grow cotton in India. In 2013, 222 metric tons. Almost a 30-fold decrease in the amount of pesticide that is necessary in order to grow Bt cotton. What about the yield? The yield has doubled in that time. You could do this with many plants. In fact, in Hawaii, they did this many years ago for papaya. Papaya was being attacked by a beetle that came from Japan, and it was eating all the trees, and they could not put enough pesticide down to stop it. And so they developed a new strain of papaya, and they put in a toxin that would kill the beetle. And now, every papaya tree and every piece of papaya that comes from Hawaii is genetically modified. And people have been eating this for years, and it's absolutely no problem whatsoever. But interestingly, to give you an idea of just how devious these politicians are, when Hawaii suggested that they should label all GM foods that were being sold in Hawaii, the papaya growers got very annoyed. Because, of course, the purpose of labeling it was to scare people. If it's got a label on and says it contains GM foods, then people get a little scared about this, and they feel that this perhaps could be dangerous. And the papaya growers were not at all happy about this. And so what did the legislation do when they were putting the legislation together? They said, we will grandfather papaya. Only things that are developed after the papaya was genetically modified will we consider new stuff genetically modified. Papaya is genetically modified. It hurts no one, it harms no one. And in fact, everything we eat has been genetically modified. The only thing that's different is the method by which we do it. You know, methods do not make a product automatically dangerous. If I take a car and build it with my hands, or I take a car that is built by a robot, is it more dangerous to have it built by a robot? Well, maybe it's actually more dangerous to have it built by a human. And humans make more mistakes than robots on the whole. So the method by which we do things doesn't matter. It is what is the product. Let us test the product. I would argue strongly that in fact the old methods of traditionally breeding plants are inherently more dangerous than the ones that are produced by GMOs. And I'll give you an example. You probably all eat celery. You like celery? Yes, everybody eats celery. Well, for ladies who work in factories that have to cut up celery on a regular basis, they develop skin cancer. And they develop skin cancer because celery has in it a carcinogen called psoralen. And if you get it constantly on your hands, it's carcinogenic and you will get cancer. Now, the amounts are not such that one has to worry about it if you just eat it occasionally. The body knows how to take care of it, it's not a problem. Had celery been subject to the same stringent regulations that we want GM products to be put through, you would not be eating any celery. It would not be on the market because it is demonstrably dangerous by the criteria that we use against GMOs. And it just makes no sense. It's not the only example. There are many other examples like this. So my conclusions are that for developed countries, food is not a problem. We have no problems at all. We have supermarkets, we've got massive agribusiness which is taking care of all our food needs. But when we take actions in the developed world, let's not forget about the problems that it might cause for the developing countries. I think we have a moral obligation not to be doing things here and not to be saying things that are dangerous when they're really not, and when the developing countries need them. And I think what we need is to get more science into politics and into the advice and getting good political decisions made, and much less politics coming into science. And finally, I think we also have to recognize that the media have played a role in this. Television and journalists, they love a good controversy. They love to tell you about all the bad stuff that goes on. You watch the TV news in the morning, what do you see? You see all the bad news. They like nothing better than bad news. And very often, if there's a mixture of good and bad news, they will try always to present it as a balanced case, irrespective of whether 99% of something is good and 1% is bad. They try to present it as bad news if they can. And I think this is another example where the media have done the general public a tremendous disservice. And so I hope all of you have become convinced during this lecture that this ban that Europe has imposed on GM foods, not only is it foolish, but it is damaging the rest of the world in ways that are unacceptable. Just how many kids have to die because they don't have access to this before we do something about it?